In this video, we'll be discussing how to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. So the first thing, I want to refresh our memories. We have a fraction that is a numerator over a denominator. And we need common denominators to be able to add and subtract with fractions. So the first thing we need to think about is how to find common denominators. For example, let's say I have the fractions 3/5 and 8/12. Now, our numerators aren't particularly important in this step. What we're trying to do first is we're trying to see if the bottom of the fraction is the same. And of course, 5 and 12 are not the same number. So what we're going to do is we are going to list out multiples of 5 and 12 until I find a common number that is on both lists. So some multiples of 5 are 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on and so forth. I currently don't have any that work with 12, so I'm going to start listing some out for 12. I have 12, I have 24, I have 36, 48, and then I have 60. Now, 12 times 5 gives me 60. In this case, that is the smallest one that works for both of them. I could keep going out 12 more times under 5 until I get to 60. But not always going to be the number times the one number times the other. So in this case that worked, but that's not an every time thing. So I strongly encourage you to write out your multiples and identify your common denominator. So I know that my common denominator is going to be 60 in this case, okay? So my final fractions should both be over 60. And then from here, now I need to decide what is my numerator going to be, because remember, a fraction is a ratio. And when I am finding a common denominator, I need to keep that ratio consistent. So however I change the denominator, I need to do the same thing to the numerator. So if I have 3/5, I multiply 5 times 12 to get 60. So if I'm multiplying the denominator by 12, that means I have to do the same thing to the numerator. So 3 times 12 is going to give me 36, and 36 over 60 is going to be 3/5 representation in our common denominator. I'm going to do the same thing with our 8/12. So I start with 8 over 12, and now I multiplied times 5 to get to 60 in the denominator here. So I'm going to multiply times 5 in the numerator as well. 8 times 5 gives me 40, and that would be our same ratios common denominator. On your own paper, I want you to think about what would the common denominator be for 1/8 and 1/2. I will go over the answer in just a moment. So hopefully you started off by listing out your common your multiples to see where your multiples fall. I like to start with a smaller number to see if I can get to the larger number within that list. So my multiples of 2 are of course 2, 4, 6, 8. And now I got to 8, which is my other denominator. So I don't need to list out all my multiples of 8 because 8 is on both lists, okay? So I don't actually need to change this first fraction at all. 1/8, 8 is my common denominator, my least common denominator. So I'm already set there. But I do need to change 1/2 to show that common denominator. So to get there, I'm going to start with 1/2. And of course, I'm trying to get a denominator of 8. So what do I multiply by 2 to get to 8? Well, I multiply by 4. Since I multiply 2 by 4, I'm also going to multiply the numerator by 4. Okay, so this step here should be the same in both the numerator and denominator. 1 times 4 gives me 4, which is equivalent to 1/2. So my common denominator, my least common denominator, is 1/8 and 4/8. So let's get into some adding and subtracting now. So for example, I have 1/2 plus 2/3. When I look at these, I see that my denominators are not the same. One of them has 2 and one of them has 3. I'm going to go through and I'm going to list out my multiples for 2 and 3 until I find something that's common for both of them. So let's say 2, 4, 6. Now I know, because I know my multiples for 3, that 6 is a multiple of 3, so I don't need to keep going from there, okay? So I'm going to turn this 1/2 and 2/3 into fractions that have a denominator of 6. I'm adding still, so I'm just going to drop that down there. Now 2, to get to 6, I have to multiply by 3. So if I do that to the denominator, I'm going to do the same thing to the numerator, and 1 times 3 is, of course, 3. And then to get from 3 to 6, I multiply by 2, and since I do that to the denominator, I'm going to do that to the numerator, and 2 times 2 gives me 4. Now, just the same as our common denominators, now that I have a common denominator, I'm going to keep my common denominator, and I'm simply going to add my numerators. 3 plus 4 gives me 7. Our final answer can be 7/6. That is an improper fraction because the numerator is larger than the denominator. Or I can rewrite this as a mixed number, 1, and when I take away 1 whole, or 6 parts of 7, I have 1 left out of 6. Our last example is going to be 4/5 minus 1/30. Now, I look at my common denominator, or my denominators, I see they are not common. 5 and 30 are not the same number, of course. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a common denominator for the two of them by listing my multiples. So I have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. There, I got to 30. 30 is on that list, so I'm not going to change this one at all. My common denominator is going to stay 30 there, so I can keep my 1. I didn't have to change that one in any way. But I need to change my other denominator here, this 5, into 30. So to get from 5 to 30, I'm going to multiply by 6, and since I do that to the denominator, I'm going to do the same thing to the numerator. I get 24. Now, again, as I've done the last couple of times, I am going to keep my common denominator of 30, and I'm simply going to subtract my numerators. 24 minus 1 gives me 23. I cannot simplify that. That is my final answer.